The escape. On an isolated farm where silence hid abuse, a young woman knew her time was coming. The colonel had already chosen, but in that dawn, while everyone slept, a man crossed the fields. He brought no weapons. He brought determination. Watch until the end and discover how a silent escape defied power. Subscribe to the channel and discover this true story of courage. The rain fell mercilessly on the thatched roof of Colonel Aguas's farm, a name that carried the irony of a place where the only water that flowed freely was that which ran from the eyes of the young women who lived there. Nestled in the depths of the Minas Gerais backlands, the property hid among hills and difficult-to-access paths, far enough away for screams to be swallowed by distance. The big house, imposing and yellowed by time, was surrounded by a wide veranda, where Colonel Jeremias Aguas used to have his breakfast while watching his employees working in the yard. The girls, always with their heads down, moved like shadows between chores, avoiding eye contact with the 60-year-old master whose hands, wrinkled by time, hid the strength of someone who never knew the meaning of the word no. There, on that farm, power was absolute. The law was made by those who enforced it, and the only existing rights were those the colonel granted on momentary whim. That Saturday morning, preparations for the annual harvest festival were stirring the property. It was an event anticipated by farmers in the region, a time when Jeremias displayed his wealth and power through abundant food, music, and the silent presence of his goddaughters, as he used to introduce the young women he kept under his guardianship. That night, there would be a new presentation. Jurema, the 17-year-old girl who had arrived 6 months earlier, brought from the city after becoming an orphan. The dark-skinned girl with almond-shaped eyes was working in the kitchen among pots and spices when she felt the gaze of the foreman Tonho upon her. It was the call. "The boss wants to see you in the office before the party," he said without emotion in his voice. "Says to wear the new dress." Jurema felt her legs weaken. She knew what the new dress meant. She had seen other girls receive the same order. Some cried for days, others went mute for weeks. All returned different, carrying an invisible weight on their shoulders that made them bend more and more toward the ground. They said in the kitchen, in whispers exchanged between spoonfuls of beans, that Margarita, the oldest among them, had tried to escape after her meeting with the colonel. They found her 2 days later, tied to the trunk in the yard, serving as an example. She spent a month sleeping in the barn until she learned gratitude. Now it was Jurema's turn. Between the walls of the kitchen, the young woman felt the air missing, while Sinha Dita, the old cook who had served the farm longer than anyone could remember, approached stealthily. "My child," she whispered, while pretending to check the seasoning of the cornmeal mush, "have faith." And she discreetly placed a small package made of banana leaf in Jurema's apron pocket. "When night comes, burn this under your window. He will know he needs to come." Jurema didn't understand, but kept the package, feeling something like dried leaves and seeds under her fingers. "Who will come, Sinha?" she asked in a low voice, while pretending to cut onions. "The one who is called when injustice speaks louder." "Then fear," replied the old woman, returning to stir the pot. "Zumbi is always watching, my daughter, and he is not always dead." On the other side of the farm, Colonel Jeremias was examining his new suit in front of the mirror, while dictating orders to Sergio, his 25-year-old son, who watched his father with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. "I want everything perfect today. Sheriff Mauricio is coming with his family, and Judge Clemente also confirmed his attendance," he said, adjusting the handkerchief around his neck. "We need to ensure they understand that we are the only authority this place needs." The son nodded, silent as he had always been since he was a child, when he learned that disagreeing with his father meant spending the night locked in the dark room under the stairs. Jeremias continued, satisfied with his reflected image. "And today we will present Jurema. Educated girl, you know. She reads and writes, a rare thing in these parts. She will impress our guests." Something in the way his father spoke made Sergio feel a knot in his stomach. He knew that tone, that look. He had seen the same happen with Rosina, with Aparecida, with so many others. Girls who arrived with lively looks and, after a few months, seemed to carry the weight of the world on their thin backs. But Sergio said nothing, just nodded again, swallowing his shame along with the words he would never have the courage to speak. Night came too quickly for Jurema. Dressed in a light blue outfit that left her shoulders exposed, she felt exposed like an animal being prepared for slaughter. Her hands trembled as she braided her own hair, following the instructions received. Outside, the first guests were already arriving, bringing the sound of laughter and music that contrasted with the heavy silence of the room where she was. Through the small window, she could see the torches illuminating the yard, the men in their suits, the wives, in colorful dresses, all silent accomplices to what was happening on that farm. Everyone knew, no one spoke. It was the law of the Backlands. Do not interfere in a colonel's business. Remembering Sinhadita's words, Jurema waited until the movement of the party reached its peak. Then carefully, she took the small banana leaf package. Inside, she found dried leaves of Jurema preta, the plant that gave her name, mixed with annatto seeds and a small hawk feather. Without fully understanding the meaning, but trusting the old cook who was the closest thing to a mother she had known in that place, she lit the small bundle with a match and placed it on a clay saucer, letting it burn slowly under the window. The smoke rose thin and bluish, carrying a strong and bitter smell. In a few minutes, someone knocked at the door. It was Tonho, the foreman, with his face marked by old scars and ever-vigilant eyes. "The colonel is calling. It's time to go down to the party." Jurema swallowed hard, feeling tears forming at the corners of her eyes. She followed the man through the narrow corridors of the big house, each step weighing like lead on her bare feet. She was about to enter the hall when a distant crash made everyone turn. At the entrance of the farm, a horse had knocked down the main gate. On it, a man in a leather hat and face, partially covered by a handkerchief, was riding headlong toward the big house. "Intruder!" someone shouted as the guests became agitated in confusion. The distraction was enough for Jurema to feel a firm hand grab her wrist. It was Tiao, the only 8-year-old boy who lived on the farm as a stable helper. With wide eyes and breathless breathing, the boy pulled her to a side corridor. "Come, miss. The man from the forest sent me to get you now. There's little time." Jurema didn't think twice. She held the small, calloused hand of Tiao and let herself be guided through the back of the big house, passing through the pantry where the maids kept supplies until reaching a door that led to the back of the property. Her bare feet barely touched the ground as she ran, the blue dress fluttering like a flag of unlikely freedom. Behind them, the shouts and confusion increased. "The colonel will be too angry," said Tiao, his voice choked with fear and the excitement of the escape. But Sinhadita said it's better for him to be angry than for you to be sad forever. Jurema's heart was beating so hard it seemed to want to jump out of her mouth. There was no time for questions. She only knew that this was her only chance. At the edge of the property, where the vegetation began to get denser, announcing the beginning of the Caatinga, a tall man waited for them next to 2 horses. Even in the darkness of night, Jurema could see that it was a black man, strong, with short curly hair and a penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond the dark. He wore rough cotton pants, a long-sleeved shirt, and a vest of tanned leather. Around his neck, he carried a necklace of colorful beads and seeds. "You are the Jurema girl," he said, not as a question but as a statement. "I am Damião. Sinhadita sent me to get you." Without waiting for an answer, he turned to Tiao, crouching down to be at the boy's height. "You were very brave, little warrior. Now you need to go back before they notice you're missing." Took from his pocket a small amulet made of carved wood, a bird with open wings, and placed it in the boy's hand. "This will protect you, and remember, you saw nothing, you know nothing." Tiao nodded, proud of his accomplished mission and his new treasure. He looked one last time at Jurema, with a smile missing 2 front teeth, and ran back to the big house, disappearing into the darkness like a small ghost. Damião helped Jurema mount the smaller horse, a brown mare that seemed calm despite the tension of the moment. "Hold on tight. We have to ride fast and without stopping until dawn." When the first shots echoed from the farm, they were already far away, entering trails in the Caatinga that only Damião's trained eyes could identify in the darkness. The wind cut Jurema's face as they rode. Her party dress, inappropriate for that escape, tore in some places when they passed through thorny bushes, but she hardly noticed. Each meter they distanced themselves from the farm was a meter closer to something she had not felt for a long time: hope. They rode for hours, stopping only twice to give water to the animals at small springs hidden among rocks. Damião moved with the assurance of someone who knew that territory like the palm of his own hand. When the first ray of sunlight began to cut across the horizon, revealing the dry and wild landscape of the backlands, they arrived at an area where the vegetation changed subtly, becoming greener and denser. "We are entering the lands of Quilombo das Águas Fundas," explained Damião, speaking for the first time since they began the escape. "It is the place where I was born and where my people have lived for more than 100 years. No one enters here without being invited or guided by one of us." Jurema observed, amazed, how the landscape seemed to transform as they advanced. The typical aridity of the backlands gave way to more abundant vegetation, with larger trees and signs of cultivation. Small gardens appeared between clearings, and soon they began to see simple adobe houses with thatched roofs, forming a natural circle around a central area. In the middle of this main clearing, a huge centuries-old fig tree extended its branches like welcoming arms over the Quilombo. In the shade of the tree, an elderly woman was sitting on a wooden bench as if waiting for them. She had dark skin marked by time, white hair tied in a colorful scarf, and hands that even from a distance Jurema could see were strong and skillful. "My grandmother, Mother Nzinga," explained Damião as he dismounted and helped Jurema do the same. "She is the guardian of the Quilombo. It was she who sent me to get you after Sinhadita sent the message." The old woman observed Jurema with eyes that seemed to carry the wisdom of many lives. When she spoke, her voice was strong and melodious, surprising for someone of her advanced age. "You have the name of the sacred plant, child. It is not a coincidence that you are here." Jurema approached timidly, feeling out of place in her torn blue dress and feet dirty from the long journey. "Why did you help me? You don't know me." The old woman smiled, revealing strong white teeth. "We know your story. It is the same as many who came before. Colonel Aguas has an old reputation in these lands. His cruelty echoes beyond what he imagines." She made a comprehensive gesture with her hand. "Here in Quilombo das Águas Fundas, half of the women have stories similar to yours. The difference is that they had someone to help them in time." Jurema's heart tightened at the thought of the other girls left behind. "And the others? There are still—" Mother Nzinga raised her hand, interrupting her. "Everything in its time, daughter. First you need to rest, eat, recover your strength. Then we'll talk about what was left behind." The old woman made a sign, and two young women approached. "Teresa and Conceição will take care of you. They are my granddaughters." At that moment, they heard the sharp cry of a child. From the nearest house, a woman came out carrying a baby wrapped in a colorful blanket. It was a boy of approximately 6 months, with light skin and bright black eyes. Upon seeing Jurema, the baby immediately stopped crying, fixing his gaze on her with a curiosity that seemed beyond his age. "This is Manuel," said Mother Nzinga. "His mother died in childbirth on the colonel's farm. Damião was only able to save the boy. We care for him as if he were the son of all of us." The baby extended his little arms toward Jurema, who hesitantly received him in her arms. The contact with that small being, so vulnerable and at the same time so full of life, provoked in her an emotion she could not name. Perhaps it was the first time since she became an orphan that she felt she could belong somewhere. In the weeks that followed, Jurema was gradually integrated into the life of the Quilombo. She learned that the community survived through a combination of agriculture, crafts, and traditional knowledge of medicinal herbs that they sold at fairs in nearby towns. She discovered that the Quilombo maintained a network of informants and allies on various farms in the region, people like Sinhadita, who risked their own lives to save others. She also learned about the history of that place, founded by escaped slaves more than a century before, and maintained through generations that refused to bow before oppression. Each day, little Manuel seemed more attached to her. Jurema, naturally, assumed the role of caretaker for the baby, singing him lullabies she barely remembered hearing when she was a child. On the hot nights of the backlands, she would sit with him on the threshold of the small house that had been assigned to her, watching the stars and silently promising that this child would never know the kind of pain she had known. On one of those nights, Damião approached, sitting at a respectful distance. "He likes you," he commented, observing the baby who slept peacefully in Jurema's arms. "They say children recognize good souls." Jurema smiled, feeling an unexpected shyness before this man she barely knew, but to whom she owed her freedom. "Do you always do this, rescue people?" Damião stared at the horizon before answering. "My father was killed by a colonel when he tried to defend my sister. I was 15. Since then I swore I would do what I could so that other families would not go through the same." His voice was calm, but Jurema could feel the strength of conviction behind his words. "Mother Nzinga taught me that true courage is not in seeking revenge, but in breaking the cycle of violence." They stayed in silence for a few minutes, sharing the weight and lightness of that moment. It was Damião who finally spoke. "The colonel hasn't given up on you. He's been spreading word that you were kidnapped, offered a reward. His men are searching all the villages in the region." The news fell like a bucket of cold water on Jurema. Instinctively, she pressed Manuel closer to her chest. "Will he find me?" Damião shook his head. "Not while you're here. Nobody betrays the Quilombo." But he hesitated. "We cannot stay hidden forever. At some point, we'll need to face this." The morning dawned orange over Quilombo das Águas Fundas when Mother Nzinga convened the Council of Elders. Seated in a circle under the shade of the centuries-old fig tree, the older men and women of the community listened attentively as she explained the situation. Colonel Jeremias has intensified the search. His henchmen are offering money for information about the girl. 3 days ago, they invaded the village of Baixa Grande and beat a merchant who refused to collaborate. The faces of those present showed concern, but not surprise. It was not the first time they had faced the fury of a powerful man. "We have 7 days," continued the elder. "In a week, Sheriff Mauricio will come with armed men for a search of the surrounding lands. If they find us..." She did not need to complete the sentence. Everyone knew what it would mean for the Quilombo to be discovered. Not only would Jurema be taken, but the entire community would be at risk. Damião, seated beside his grandmother, as her right hand spoke up, "We can take Jurema to the Quilombo of Serra das Almas. It's a 3-day journey, but it's safer." Mother Nzinga considered the suggestion for a moment, but shook her head. "Running only postpones the problem. The colonel will continue his search, and other innocents will suffer along the way. We cannot allow this." A heavy silence fell over the group. It was Father Joaquim, the oldest of the elders, who finally spoke, his hoarse voice bringing the weight of almost 90 years of life. "The time has come to break the colonel's power." His words provoked murmurs among those present. Breaking a colonel's power was not a simple task in the backlands, where the law was confused with the will of the powerful. "How?" questioned Teresa, one of the youngest women on the council. "He has money, he has weapons, he has the police on his side." Father Joaquim smiled, revealing gums almost without teeth. "He has all that, but he doesn't have the truth on his side. And the truth, when spoken at the right time and in the right way, can bring down even the strongest of men." While the council discussed strategies, Jurema was in the communal house taking care of the young children along with other women. Little Manuel, now more attached to her than ever, played with a rattle made of gourd and seeds. Around him, 5 other children of different ages ran and laughed, oblivious to the tension that hung over the adults. It was watching those children that an idea began to form in Jurema's mind. If the colonel found her, it would not be just her who would suffer. It would be this entire community that had welcomed her. It would be these innocent little ones. For the first time since she had arrived at the Quilombo, she felt that she needed to do more than just hide. When Damião came to get the children for lunch, he found Jurema with a determined expression he had not seen before. "I need to speak with Mother Nzinga," she said, handing Manuel to another caretaker. "I have an idea, but I'll need courage." By mid-afternoon, the decision was made. The plan was risky, but everyone agreed it was the best chance they had. Jurema would be the bait, but she would not be alone. The entire Quilombo would support her, each with their specific role in that dangerous staging. "We have 5 days to prepare," announced Mother Nzinga. "Every minute counts." The next days were of intense activity in the Quilombo. Secret messengers were sent to allies in neighboring towns. Herbs were harvested and prepared under the careful supervision of the elders. Men and women rehearsed their roles repeatedly. Jurema spent hours with Mother Nzinga, learning not just what she should say, but how she should say it, with the strength that comes not from hatred, but from the certainty of being on the right side. On the eve of the appointed day, as the Quilombo retired for a night of prayers and protection rituals, Jurema found Damião sitting alone by the small reservoir that provided water for the community. She approached silently, sitting beside him on a smooth stone. "Are you afraid?" he asked, without taking his eyes from the surface of the water where the moon was reflected tremulously. "Yes," admitted Jurema, "but I'm also determined. It's strange how the two things can exist together, isn't it?" Damião nodded, finally turning to face her. "My grandmother says that fear is only a problem when it prevents you from doing what is right. When you act despite it, fear transforms into strength." They remained in silence for a few moments, just feeling each other's presence, the warmth of their bodies close contrasting with the cool night breeze. It was Jurema who broke the silence. "If something goes wrong tomorrow..." Damião placed a finger on her lips, interrupting her. "Nothing will go wrong. I'll be there the whole time, I promise." With a deliberately slow gesture, as if asking permission, he touched Jurema's face, tracing the delicate contour of her jaw with his fingertips. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel that touch that spoke more than words could express. When their lips met, it was as if all the fear and all the uncertainty dissolved momentarily, replaced by a certainty that neither needed to put into words. The following morning arrived with a clear sky and a merciless sun, typical of the backlands. Jurema dressed in a simple raw cotton dress, tied her hair in a single braid, and wore leather sandals. Before departing, Mother Nzinga placed around her neck a necklace made of Jurema preta seeds and blue beads. "For protection," she explained, "and to remember who you are." The group that left the Quilombo was small: Jurema, Damião, Father Joaquim, and 2 younger men who would serve as guards. They carried only the essentials and traveled on foot, avoiding the main roads. The destination was the town of Bom Jesus da Lapa, where Sheriff Mauricio would be for the annual Patron Saints Festival, a celebration that attracted people from all over the region, including authorities and important farmers. The path was traveled in tense silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts and fears. When they reached the first houses of the small town, the sun was already high, mercilessly punishing the clay roofs and the beaten earth streets. The central square was decorated for the festival, with colorful flags extended between posts and food and game stalls scattered around the church. People of all ages circulated animatedly, creating a cheerful buzz that contrasted with the tension of the small, newly arrived group. As agreed, Jurema separated from the others, walking alone toward the bandstand, where a small band was playing. Her eyes scanned the crowd until she found what she was looking for: Sheriff Mauricio, a corpulent man with a well-groomed mustache, talking with other important-looking men. Among them, as expected, was Colonel Jeremias Aguas. Seeing him again made Jurema's stomach turn. The man seemed smaller than in her memories, less imposing but no less dangerous. His small, astute eyes moved constantly, as if looking for something or someone. Gathering all the courage she could find, Jurema took a deep breath and began to cross the square toward the group. She didn't need to get very close. One of the colonel's henchmen spotted her and immediately nudged his boss, pointing in her direction. Jeremias's face transformed into a mask of surprise and anger. "It's her! The girl who was stolen from my farm!" he shouted, attracting the attention of everyone around. Sheriff Mauricio quickly stepped forward, his hand on his holster. "Stop right there, girl," he ordered with an authoritative voice. Jurema obeyed, standing still in the middle of the square while a curious crowd began to form around her. "This is the young woman that Colonel Aguas reported as kidnapped," explained the sheriff to those present. "Where have you been hiding, girl? And who took you?" Before Jurema could answer, the colonel advanced, his face red with anger. "It doesn't matter where she's been. She is my goddaughter. She's under my responsibility. I demand that she be immediately handed over to my custody." It was at this moment that Father Joachim emerged from the crowd, leaning on his carved wooden cane. His fragile but dignified figure imposed a momentary silence on the square. "With your permission, Mr. Sheriff," he spoke, his voice surprisingly strong for someone of his age. "Before handing over the girl, wouldn't it be fair to hear what she has to say?" The sheriff hesitated, looking from the old man to the colonel, who seemed about to explode. "She is just an ungrateful servant," vociferated Jeremias. "Nothing she says has value." "If she is just an ungrateful servant, what harm can it do to hear her?" questioned Father Joachim, with a serene smile that momentarily disarmed the sheriff. "Let her speak," finally decided Mauricio, more out of curiosity than a sense of justice. "But be brief, girl." Jurema stepped forward, feeling everyone's eyes on her. For a terrifying instant, she thought she would lose her voice, that the rehearsed words would escape her memory. Then her eyes found Damio in the crowd, and the certainty returned. "My name is Jurema Silva," she began, her voice initially trembling, gaining strength with each word. "I was taken to Colonel Aguas's farm after my mother's death, with the promise of honest work and protection. What I found was different." A murmur ran through the crowd while the colonel tried to interrupt. "Lies! All lies from an ungrateful girl I took in out of charity." Sheriff Mauricio, however, made a gesture for Jurema to continue. There was something in that young woman's determination that had awakened his curiosity. "On the colonel's farm," continued Jurema, her voice now firm and clear, "live 15 girls, all orphans or from families so poor they could not refuse the offer of work. All arrive as employees and end up as—" She hesitated, seeking the right words. "Properties. The colonel calls us goddaughters in front of others, but in the darkness of the corridors of the big house, he calls us his private servants." The buzz increased. Women exchanged looks of understanding. Men seemed uncomfortable. Colonel Jeremias advanced threateningly, but was contained by the sheriff's severe look. "I would be next," continued Jurema. "On the night of the harvest festival, I received the blue dress. We all know what the blue dress means. It's time to serve the colonel in another way." A heavy silence fell over the square. Even the colonel seemed momentarily speechless, his small eyes moving quickly from side to side, like a cornered animal. "And it's not just me," Jurema's voice gained new strength. "I am here representing all the others who could not escape. I am here for Rosinha, who tried to escape and spent a month tied to the trunk as punishment. For Aparecida, who threw herself into the reservoir after a night in the colonel's room. For Margarita, who went mad from so much suffering." At this moment, to everyone's surprise, a female voice rose from the crowd. "It's true!" Everyone turned to see a middle-aged lady dressed simply but with evident dignity. "I am Antonia Ferreira, midwife in this town for 30 years. I was called many times to the colonel's farm to attend births that no one mentions afterward, of children who are never seen." Another voice joined in. "My daughter Joanna was taken to work there 2 years ago. When I finally managed to visit her, she was unrecognizable. Thin, frightened, she refused to speak to me alone." It was an elderly man, of humble appearance, who identified himself as João Bento, a small farmer from the region. One by one, other voices rose, a merchant who sold supplies at the farm and had witnessed the treatment given to the girls. A former employee who had fled years before and had been living in hiding since then. Tiao himself, the boy who had helped Jurema escape, brought to town by Damião without the colonel knowing. The little one, trembling with fear but determined, told how the girls cried at night and how the colonel punished them for any small failure. With each new testimony, the colonel's face grew paler. His son Sergio, who watched everything from a distance, seemed divided between shame and relief. Sheriff Mauricio, a man who had always considered himself just within the conveniences of the system that sustained him, found himself in an increasingly difficult position. It was then that Mother Nzinga emerged from the crowd, her majestic presence naturally silencing the whispers. Beside her, a young woman carried a baby wrapped in a colorful blanket, little Manuel. This boy, announced the elder with a powerful voice, was born on the colonel's farm. His mother died in childbirth without assistance, locked in a room so that no one would hear her screams. She was another one of the goddaughters. Colonel Jeremias, cornered, tried his last resort. They are all liars. This old woman commands a band of runaway quilombolas. They are the criminals, not me. Sheriff Maurizio, who until then had maintained a neutral expression, finally spoke. Quilombolas or not, they are exercising their right to speak. And you, Colonel, will have your right to defense before the judge. A triumphant smile began to form on the Colonel's face. Judge Clemente, my friend Clemente, he will never... No, interrupted the sheriff. The federal judge who arrived yesterday in Salvador, the one the governor sent to investigate allegations of abuse of power in the interior. Jeremias's smile instantly disappeared. This is absurd. I am a respectable citizen. I pay my taxes. I create jobs. His face was now red with anger and fear. He tried to advance, but two soldiers held him by the arms. Colonel Jeremias Aguas, formally announced the sheriff, you are detained for investigation on charges of false imprisonment, abuse of authority, and... He hesitated briefly. Crimes against the honor of minors under your guardianship. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the powerful colonel was led away, struggling and shouting threats. His son Sergio, after a moment of hesitation, timidly approached Jurema. I knew, he said in a low voice. I always knew and never did anything. I am guilty too. Jurema looked at that young man who carried the weight of his father's name and felt, surprisingly, not hatred, but compassion. There is still time to do the right thing, she replied. The girls who remained on the farm need help now. Sergio nodded, a new determination shining in his eyes. I will get them personally. And when all this is over, if you allow me, I want to learn how to do things differently, how to break this cycle. In the week that followed, the news of Colonel Jeremias's arrest spread through the backlands like wildfire. For many, it was unthinkable that a colonel could fall. That power that seemed absolute could be questioned. For others, it was the first breath of a long-awaited change. The girls from the farm were rescued and initially taken to homes of families in the town, who offered to shelter them. Some were so traumatized they could barely speak. Others, on the contrary, could not stop telling their stories, as if each word spoken was a weight lifted from their shoulders. The federal judge, a middle-aged man with a reputation for being incorruptible, heard all the testimonies and was not impressed by the attempts of the colonel's lawyers to disqualify the witnesses. The law is for everyone, he declared in his pronouncement. No matter how powerful someone considers themselves, they are not above human dignity. Colonel Jeremias was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a sentence that many considered too lenient, but which represented an unprecedented break with the impunity that had always protected men like him. At Quilombo das Aguas Fundas, life gradually found a new balance. After the trial, Jurema returned with Damio and the others, bringing with her not only the certainty of justice done, but also 3 of the young women from the farm who preferred the freedom of the Quilombo to life in the town. Among them was Margarita, the oldest, whose broken spirit was slowly beginning to heal under Mother Nzinga's patient care. On a golden late afternoon, 6 months after the events that changed so many lives, Jurema was sitting by the reservoir, watching little Manuel, who was now taking his first uncertain steps in the sand. Damio approached, carrying in his hands a small package. A gift, he said, sitting beside her, from my grandmother. Inside the package, Jurema found Jurema preta seeds, the same ones that had initiated that entire journey. To plant, explained Damio. Mother Nzinga says that this is how we ensure that stories continue, by planting what we harvest. Jurema closed her hand over the seeds, feeling their weight and promise. We'll plant them tomorrow, she decided, and tell Manuel the story of how he came to us so that he understands where he comes from and what it means to be free. Damião smiled, taking Jurema's free hand between his own. And we'll tell him about his mother, and about all the brave women who came before us, and about how one person's courage can change the destiny of many. That night, as the Quilombo retired under a starry sky, Jurema sat at the door of her house, now also Damião's house, and wrote in a notebook she had received as a gift from the teacher who had begun to visit the community, to teach the younger ones to read and write. She wrote about everything that had happened, without omitting the pain, but also without forgetting the hope. She wrote to remember, to teach, to ensure that story would not be lost. On the last page, in careful handwriting, she recorded the names of all the girls from the Colonel's farm, followed by a simple phrase, "None was forgotten." Colonel Jeremias's farm, confiscated by the state after his conviction, was transformed into an agricultural school for young people from the region, directed by Sergio, who had finally found a purpose to erase the stain left by his father. The big house, once a symbol of oppression, now housed classrooms where boys and girls learned not only to cultivate the land, but also their rights and dignity. In the center of the yard, where the punishment trunk once stood, a fig tree was planted, a sapling brought from Quilombo das Águas Fundas by the hands of Jurema and Damião. And when the first flower of the Jurema preta, planted by them, opened its delicate petals in the yard of their house in the Quilombo, Jurema knew she had finally found her place, not as a servant, not as a victim, but as a free woman who had helped break a cycle of pain to build one of hope. Little Manuel, now speaking his first words, called her mother, a title she accepted with a heart full of the love she had previously thought impossible to feel. With each new child born in the Quilombo, with each young woman rescued from situations of abuse who arrived seeking refuge, the story was told again. The story of how a shy young woman had found the courage to face power that seemed unshakable, and of how the truth, when spoken with determination, could bring down even the highest walls of injustice. If this narrative touched your heart, and you believe that stories of courage and overcoming need to be shared, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and share your thoughts in the comments. Just as Jurema planted seeds of hope that transformed